Hello, this is Dr. Jerry Lloyd, and I'd like to talk about Joseph, Mary's husband, Joseph's dilemma. In Matthew chapter 1, verse 19, we are acquainted with this dilemma. It says, "Then Joseph, her husband, being a just man and not willing to make her a public example, was minded to put her away privily." Now, first of all, I'd like to point out that Joseph, at this time, was her husband, was not a fiancé. He was married to her. They had exchanged their vows, and the price had been paid for the dowry, and they exchanged rings. And so in the pronunciations, there was a document that was written up to guarantee their wedding, or we'd call it a wedding license today. Only it's more than that. It's a wedding certificate because they already were married. And so this is her husband. The word for husband there, while it doesn't really actually necessarily mean husband, it means a mature man. And being her man would narrow it down to be her husband, being her man. But it would definitely, if all things, would not be her fiancé. That would be a mistranslation. And so it would be a very careless translation. The reason I'm bringing this out is because there are actually some Bible translators that are more concerned about making it easy to read and understand than it is accuracy. Well, the problem is that's not very accurate. And therefore, you do not understand by being translated that way what it actually is talking about, what it means. And therefore, the rest of the verse would not make as much sense, and they would have to water that down also. What is the rest of the verse saying? "And Joseph, her husband, being a just man and not willing to make her a public example." Now, he had 3 or 4 alternatives. Basically, he could, since she was married to him, he could have her stoned to death as a public example. That's not talking about embarrassing her, or not talking about shaming her. It's talking about ending her life, which would be embarrassing, I suppose, until she was in heaven. So, but here it's talking about the stoning. Well, he was too compassionate for that, and so he was thinking about divorcing her, putting her away privily. Now, there was a third alternative, and that third alternative was he could take her to be his wife and claim the child for his own. The problem with that was probably the reason that he chose her to be married, or his parents did, or however it was worked out, was because that she was of the line of David. She was a descendant of David, and therefore in line to be the king of Israel's mother. And Joseph also, he was of the line of David also, and was in line to be the father of the king of Israel. And she was a descendant of David through Solomon, and he was a descendant through Nathan, or I may have that backwards now, but I knew it a few minutes ago. But at any rate, so that's probably the reason that their parents encouraged them to get married, if they did, in fact. So they got married. Now, if he'd have claimed this child to be in his own, and as some have commented that this was the product of the union with a Roman soldier, which of course they're simply trying to discredit and was blasphemy against Jesus to say such a thing. But if this were a case, it was an unknown person, or someone who was not in line to be the king of Israel, then he would be claiming a child that would be Roman, that would be his son, and therefore be the heir to the throne of Israel. You can see the dilemma there. If a Roman citizen or a Roman soldier was going to be the king of Israel, this would be a dilemma. So he was mindful to put her away privily. But of course, later on, we find out that he took her to be his wife. So we find these things are very important to translate these things correctly and to understand some of the background. As far as being he was probably, I believe, about 30 years old, because of when a child was first born, they were an infant. There was a Greek word for that. Then they became a teknon, or a young man or young child. Then they became a son of the law when they were bar mitzvahed, and that would be around 13 years of age, or 12. And then they would receive their inheritance, build their business, build their house, build their crops, build their flocks until they were about 30 years old. And then they've had enough experience, and they've put enough by to pay the dowry to marry a young woman, and marry a young woman probably around 13 years old. So this was when we read this, these things kind of come to mind, or should. It says, then Joseph, her husband, being a just man and not willing to make her a public example, was minded to put her away privily. So we see his dilemma, and the choice he would make, where it was because of the dream of an angel, Gabriel, coming to him at a later time. If you've enjoyed these comments, well, share them with someone else, and then like them, and subscribe if you haven't already. This is Dr. Jerry Lloyd. Thank you very much.